Hi, my name is Kailyn Pritchard, and today I'm here to share with you a little bit about Classroom Assessment Technique number 43 from Classroom Assessment Techniques by Angelo and Cross. And this technique is called Deliberate Practice Assessment. So Deliberate Practice Assessment invites students to fill out a brief survey describing the frequency and the structure of their practice. It also invites them to reflect on how effective and how enjoyable that practice is, what could be done to improve it, or how open they might be to considering ways of improving their practice. Here we can see an example of one of these sorts of surveys. You can see that it starts with some basic factual information about their practice. How many days a week do they practice? How many hours per day are they typically practicing? And then the survey moves into, whether they were taught a specific practice routine that they follow, yes or no, right? And then where did this practice routine come from? Who did they learn it from? How did they learn it? And can they go ahead and describe the steps involved in that practice routine? If they don't have a set practice routine that they learned from someone in particular, they're asked to briefly describe how they usually go about practicing. Then the survey moves into a little bit more of a reflection, asking how they feel about their practice, right? How difficult do they find it to maintain concentration? Do they enjoy practicing? And then how effective are they finding their current practice routine to be in terms of how it's helping them to improve or not? And then how interested are they in exploring potentially more effective practice routines? And are there any aspects of their practice in particular that they have identified as being something that they would like to change, that they could potentially talk to a tutor about or an instructor about improving? This classroom assessment technique of deliberate practice is useful in a wide variety of contexts. Of course, I always think first about my own instructional context of mathematics, which you can see in the center, but really this is useful in any context where students are practicing a newly acquired skill or looking to acquire a skill, right? So this could be an artistic skill. I've included sewing here, piano, right? Vocals, any kind of musical instrument or music or art form. I considered beadwork or other kinds of handiwork, mechanical work, anything that you're doing with your hands. This also extends to medical practice, right? First aid, we're looking for a lot of deliberate hands-on practice. Same with medicine. We could think about injections, or I have a friend who's going into nursing who was recently doing a lot of practice with taking folks' blood pressure as part of her education. Some advantages of this classroom assessment technique is that it's easy and quick to do, right? We saw in the example survey that lots of those questions are really quick and easy to answer, right? We're giving a number out of 7, we're answering a yes, no, or we can respond in a couple of sentences, right, to some of those questions that are being asked. Some of the other advantages is that ideally this practice is already happening, right? If it is already happening, we're increasing students' conscientiousness of how it is that they are practicing, right? Their awareness of their current choices, or creating space to improve those choices. If practice isn't happening, we're giving folks a chance to reflect on why that might be happening, right? What's keeping them from practicing? Why, where could they go about getting a kind of routine? How many days a week, how many hours a week would they like to be practicing? By asking these questions, we open up a space for folks to consider that maybe they ought to be practicing, and what would that look like to have happen in a way that works for them. In terms of limitations, right, students may not be entirely honest about how much they're practicing. This may or may not be deliberate, right? If folks believe that they are being assessed on how much they're practicing, or that this is going to change your opinion of them as an instructor, that could impact their willingness to be honest or transparent with you on this sort of a survey. But they might also just have a lack of self-awareness, right? They may have a skewed perception of how much time they're actually spending dedicated to deliberate practice, rather than sitting at their desk and perhaps being distracted by something else. As we start to consider best practices for this sort of classroom assessment technique, this great quote from the Ministry of Education in Ontario that says, "Practice is a necessary component of an effective math program," though this extends to any program really. "Practice is best when it is deliberate, purposeful, and spaced. Regardless of the form of practice, ongoing feedback is crucial so that students know they are practicing correctly and that they have practiced sufficiently." So as we start to think about best practices, right? Deliberate, purposeful and spaced, right? There's this element of ongoing feedback, so they know they're practicing correctly, they're practicing the right things in the right way, and such that they know when they're finished practicing a certain skill and can move on to the next thing. Craig Barton defines 5 stages of deliberate practice in his book, How I Wish I'd Taught Maths. He refers to having been inspired by K. Anders Ericsson and et al.'s paper, The Role of Deliberate Practice in the Acquisition of Expert Performance, a paper in Psychological Review. And so he breaks deliberate practice down into these 5 stages. So stage 1, isolate the skill. Here he recommends breaking the skill down into simpler sub-processes. Then in stage 2, develop the skill. He encourages using worked examples, right? Making sure that they're the appropriate difficulty and that they're targeting the right aspects of the skill. In stage 3, assess the skill. He recommends identifying any misconceptions or areas of confusion, right? Are there things that students believe that they've understood correctly that actually are not necessarily true? This happens with reasonable frequency in mathematics. Stage 4, the final performance. Here we're recombining the sub-processes into one combined overall process. And then in stage 5, retrieval practice, students have the opportunity to use the skill, right, ensuring that they know when it's appropriate and how to implement it. After students have completed this reflection on their practice, feedback could be provided in a number of different ways, right? If it's in a written weekly reflection, there could be written feedback in response, but we could also have in-class discussions about how folks are practicing, resources available for practice, or how to get feedback on their practice in office hours or workshop hours. Thank you for watching, and happy practicing!